It all started in the middle of a crowded grocery store parking lot, a place most of us rush through without paying much attention. You've probably seen it before: the packed aisles of vehicles, the hustle of people loading their trunks, and the narrow spots reserved for those who need them most. But this story doesn't begin with a crash or a scream. It begins with silence. A silence that fell over the area when one woman, clearly in a hurry and seemingly unaware, or maybe just unwilling to care, parked her luxury SUV directly across a clearly marked wheelchair-accessible ramp. Not just close to it, right on top of it. And what happened next would not only shock the people watching from nearby, but also ignite a confrontation that no one saw coming. A confrontation that would put entitlement and courage on full display, face to face. And here's where it gets real, because the man she blocked wasn't just any stranger. He was a United States Marine, wheelchair-bound, decorated, hardened by war, softened by life, and completely unwilling to let this kind of disrespect go unanswered. Now, before we get into what he said to her, before we unpack the moment that made every single person in that parking lot stop in their tracks, I want you to ask yourself something. Have you ever witnessed a moment so tense, so morally clear, that you knew immediately whose side you were on, but you just didn't know what would happen next? That's exactly what the story is about. And trust me, you're going to want to stay with me until the end, because what this Marine did next wasn't just unexpected. It was something that flipped the entire situation upside down. This is the kind of story that makes you question what you would do if you were there, standing just a few feet away. Would you have spoken up? Would you have pulled out your phone? Would you have stayed silent? You'll get your answer. I promise you that. But first, let me take you inside the minds of the people involved, because to understand this moment, you have to understand the tension building underneath the surface. Let me talk to you directly for a second, not just as a viewer, but as someone who knows what it's like to feel that flash of frustration when you see someone breaking the rules like they're above them. Maybe you've held the door open for someone and they walked through without saying thank you. Maybe you've seen someone breeze through a red light like the rules just don't apply to them. But what happens when it's more than just rude? What happens when it's dangerous? Disrespectful? Illegal? That's what we're dealing with here. And I know you're here because something about that headline pulled you in. Woman blocks ramp with her SUV. Then a wheelchair-bound Marine confronts her. You want to know what happened. You want to know what he said. You want to know how she reacted. And I'm telling you now, you're going to get all of that, but only once you understand what makes this story so much more than just a parking lot dispute. This is about dignity. This is about respect. And this is about what happens when someone who's given everything for his country finds himself disrespected in the most basic, human way. So let me set the scene. It was just after noon on a Saturday, sun blazing overhead, families in and out of the store, carts rattling across pavement. The woman behind the wheel was dressed in designer workout clothes, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, music thumping through her tinted windows. She didn't even glance at the blue and white paint on the ground, or if she did, she didn't care. With one sharp turn of her steering wheel, she pulled her SUV over the ramp and put the car in park like she owned the place. There were open spots just a few feet away, but those were apparently too far for her. Too inconvenient. Meanwhile, across the parking lot, another vehicle was pulling in, a van outfitted for wheelchair access. Inside sat a man in his late 40s, his posture upright, his face steady. His uniform days behind him, but the discipline still present in every movement. This was Sergeant Nathan Keller, retired Marine, double amputee, and a man who'd been through things most of us can't even imagine. And now he just wanted to buy a few groceries. But instead, he was about to teach someone a lesson she'd never forget. Now, before you assume this is one of those typical viral videos where someone gets loud, aggressive, maybe even violent, let me stop you. That's not what this is. This story is different. It's not about yelling. It's about presence. It's about the kind of calm confrontation that makes people stop and reevaluate who they are. And what makes it even more powerful is that it didn't come from a place of anger. Not exactly. It came from something deeper, something older. A belief that there are certain lines you don't cross, and if you do, someone's going to remind you why they were there in the first place. I want you to think for a moment about who this woman is. Not just her name, we'll get to that, but her mindset. She represents a type of behavior we've all witnessed. The kind of person who sees the world as revolving around her schedule, her needs, her convenience. She didn't block that ramp because she was evil.
No.
That would be too easy. She blocked it because she didn't think she'd get called out. She believed nobody would dare challenge her. And maybe she was right until now. Because when Sergeant Keller rolled up to that blocked ramp, he didn't just see an obstacle. He saw a message. A message that said, "You don't matter." And if there's one thing you should know about Marines, it's that they don't take kindly to being told they don't matter. Now here's where things start to get interesting. People nearby started noticing what was going on. Some pulled out their phones. Others whispered. A couple even took slow steps backward, sensing something was about to go down. But no one could predict how this Marine would handle it. Because instead of raising his voice, he raised his hand. And what he did next caused a ripple effect that spread across the entire parking lot. One moment, one gesture, one sentence. That's all it took to flip the script completely. And the woman? Let's just say, she didn't expect to be called out like this. Especially not by someone society often overlooks. But here's the twist. This confrontation wouldn't just change her attitude. It would reveal something about her past that no one, not even she, was ready to admit. So don't go anywhere, because the story's just getting started. And the question you're asking, what did he say to her? You'll get your answer. But you won't just hear the words. You'll understand the weight behind them. You'll feel the moment like you were there. And by the end, you'll see how one quiet confrontation in a parking lot became a lesson in accountability that reached far beyond that sunny Saturday afternoon. But be warned, once you hear what happened next, you'll never look at those blue-painted ramps the same way again. Just days before this incident unfolded in the grocery store parking lot, Sergeant Nathan Keller had been living what many would consider a quiet, post-service life, at least on the surface. Retired from active duty for nearly a decade, Nathan had settled into a modest home just outside San Diego, surrounded by a small circle of friends who understood the complexities of his past and the price he'd paid for the freedom of others. His days were structured, almost ritualistic. Early morning workouts in his customized home gym, physical therapy sessions twice a week, and volunteer work at a nearby VA center where he mentored younger veterans struggling to adjust to civilian life. To most who met him, Nathan was the textbook definition of discipline, humility, and quiet strength. But what they didn't see, what they couldn't possibly understand, was the weight he carried each time he wheeled out his front door. Not just the physical limitations, but the burden of watching society slowly erode the very respect he and his brothers in arms had fought to protect. That's what made this particular Saturday feel different. Earlier that morning, Nathan had received a letter, one that he hadn't expected. It came from the Department of Veterans Affairs, but this one wasn't about his benefits or his health plan. It was a formal notice that the funding for a local accessibility initiative he had been championing for nearly 3 years was being reassessed due to budget constraints. It hit him hard. That program was meant to build better wheelchair access into older buildings throughout the city, places where veterans and elderly citizens constantly struggled. And now, after all the work, after all the speeches and meetings and fundraising events, it was just on hold. No explanation. No timeline. Just bureaucracy doing what it does best, cutting corners in places that matter most. So when Nathan wheeled himself into that store parking lot that day, he wasn't just running errands. He was already in a state of simmering frustration. He had spent his morning reading legalese that amounted to one clear message: wait your turn. Your problem isn't urgent. But Nathan wasn't the only person having a different kind of day. The woman in the SUV, later identified by witnesses as Amanda Rourke, was no stranger to confrontation. In fact, over the past few months, Amanda had developed a bit of a reputation in the area. A real estate agent by trade, she was known for her aggressive style and laser-focused drive. Her social media, filled with curated shots of staged homes, designer shoes, and motivational quotes about winning at life, painted the picture of a woman who believed success came first, and everything else could wait. Neighbors often whispered about her temper. Just 2 weeks earlier, she'd reportedly gotten into a shouting match with a barista over a mispronounced name on her coffee cup. And while that might seem petty to most, it spoke volumes about how Amanda handled perceived slights. But here's where things start to twist, because Amanda hadn't always been like this. Just a year ago, she was part of a local charity board focused on helping disabled veterans. She even organized an event that Nathan had attended, though the two never formally met. So what changed? Why would someone who once supported veteran causes now carelessly block a ramp without a second thought? Some believe it was the pressure. Amanda's recent divorce had quietly shaken her foundation. Her ex-husband, a corporate attorney, had moved to another state and taken with him both emotional distance and half of their shared assets. The house, the boat, the investments, they were all up for grabs. And with a young son to raise, Amanda had doubled down on her image, burying herself in work, building a brand of confidence and control that masked a rising tide of stress and resentment. Parking in front of that ramp might not have been malicious, but it was certainly careless. And it hinted at a deeper truth. Amanda was unraveling, even if no one had noticed yet. Or maybe someone had. Because in the days leading up to this confrontation, several anonymous messages had been posted to a local Facebook group. Complaints about Amanda's behavior. Vague threats. One post, now deleted, read, "Some people think rules don't apply to them. They're about to learn." No name was mentioned. No details. But it sent chills down the spine of those who'd read it. Nathan hadn't seen the posts himself, but the tension in the neighborhood was undeniable. And what's more, there were whispers that someone had been following Amanda, watching her. Her assistant mentioned seeing a black sedan parked across the street more than once in the past week. Another neighbor noticed the same car idling near her driveway late at night. Was it just coincidence? Or was something, or someone, watching and waiting for her to slip up? Could this confrontation with Nathan be more than just a chance encounter? Could it be the spark that would ignite something much bigger? At this point, the audience in the parking lot was growing. People were frozen, caught between the comfort of their own lives and the growing realization that something serious was about to unfold. But the real question wasn't just what Nathan would say. It was whether Amanda would even hear it. Would she listen? Or would she do what she always did, deflect, deny, and drive off with her pride intact? But here's where the mystery deepens. Just before Nathan made his move toward the blocked ramp, he paused. Not for dramatic effect, but because he saw something. Something none of the bystanders noticed. Amanda's license plate wasn't just a vanity plate. It was a specialty veteran plate, Army Spouse. The decal was faded but unmistakable, which meant at some point Amanda had been married to someone in the service. And just like that, 100 new questions came rushing in. What happened in that marriage? Why did it end? And why was someone who had once lived within the military community now showing such blatant disregard for one of its wounded warriors? Nathan's mind was racing, but he didn't let it show. Years of training had taught him how to mask emotion, how to wait for the right moment to strike, not with fists, but with words that hit just as hard. And yet, as he approached, there was a shadow of hesitation. Not fear, not doubt, but something else. A flicker of familiarity. Because in that split second, Nathan realized he had seen Amanda before. Not just at the charity event, but years ago in a photo. A framed picture in a hospital room, next to the bed of a fellow Marine named Jackson Rourke. Amanda's ex-husband. A man who had lost his life in a training accident long after his deployment ended. A man Nathan had served with. A man who once spoke proudly of his wife and child. And now, here she was, blocking a ramp her late husband would have fought to keep clear. So now the stakes weren't just personal. They were deeply connected, tangled in a web of past loyalties, broken promises, and unspoken grief. Nathan had thought this was a simple case of entitlement. A woman too busy, too self-important to follow the rules. But now he wasn't so sure. And that uncertainty added a new layer of tension, because if Amanda was dealing with more than just a bad attitude, if she was haunted by a past she hadn't come to terms with, then what happened next wouldn't just be a confrontation. It would be a reckoning. Not just for her, but for both of them. And still, the crowd waited. Phones were recording. Hearts were pounding. And Nathan, his hands steady on the wheels of his chair, took a breath, lifted his head, and rolled toward the SUV. What he would say, and how she would respond, would determine whether this moment became just another forgotten video clip, or something far more powerful. But what neither of them knew was that someone else was watching from a distance. Someone with their own reasons for keeping this feud alive. And that person had just hit record. Just as Nathan approached Amanda's SUV and the initial confrontation began to unfold, something subtle shifted in the air, something that most people wouldn't notice, but to someone trained to read microexpressions, body language, and slight behavioral cues, it was impossible to miss. Amanda didn't just look annoyed or defensive. She looked startled, almost as if seeing Nathan triggered a memory she wasn't prepared to confront. Her eyes locked on his for a half-second too long. Her jaw tightened, not in anger, but in recognition. And that was the first red flag. Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that she knew exactly who he was, even if she pretended not to. But before he could press further or ask the questions now pounding in his chest, a piercing screech of tires broke the tension. A delivery van, speeding through the lot, nearly clipped the corner of Amanda's vehicle. The distraction was brief, but deliberate. And by the time Nathan turned back, Amanda had slammed her door shut and driven off, leaving him sitting there, confused, suspicious, and now even more determined to figure out what was really going on. That might have been the end of it, but later that evening, Nathan made a decision that would change everything. He went back through his old records, the photos, the documents, and the notes he had kept from his time at the VA center. He still had a file on Jackson Rourke, Amanda's late husband. There had been something strange about his death that never sat right with Nathan. The official report had called it an accident, training mishap, faulty equipment, quick and tragic. But the men who'd served with Jackson had whispered otherwise. They hinted at things that didn't line up. Delayed communications, unreported injuries, a change in protocol that no one wanted to discuss. Nathan had shelved those doubts back then, chalking them up to grief and the fog of war. But now, standing in his small home office with a stack of yellowing papers and fading photographs, he realized something had been buried. And Amanda might be the key to unlocking it. But as Nathan began digging, the obstacles started piling up faster than he could handle. The first came when he returned to the VA center the next morning to look at Jackson's service file. The record, once easily accessible, had vanished. A staffer named Marlene, who had always been cooperative, now claimed she couldn't find it anywhere. "Sometimes things get misplaced," she said with a forced smile, but Nathan could hear the nervous tremor in her voice. He pressed her, calmly but firmly, and that's when she said something that sent a chill down his spine. "Maybe it's better if you let this one go, Sergeant. Not everything that's buried needs to be dug up." It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. And it wasn't just her words that unsettled him. It was the look in her eyes. Fear. Genuine fear. Nathan didn't scare easily, but he knew how to read people. Someone had told Marlene to keep quiet. Someone powerful enough to pull a military file from federal records without a trace. And it wasn't just the VA center acting strange. That same afternoon, he noticed a black sedan parked 2 houses down from his. Same model as the one Amanda's neighbors had described. It didn't move. The windows were tinted too dark for California legal limits. And when Nathan approached it with slow, deliberate movements, nothing threatening, just curious, the car suddenly peeled out and disappeared around the corner. No plates. No hesitation. That wasn't just someone watching. That was a warning shot. Still, Nathan wasn't ready to back down. He'd fought too many battles to be scared off by shadows. But he also knew he needed help. So he called in a favor from someone he hadn't spoken to in nearly 5 years. Her name was Talia Vega, a former Army intelligence analyst turned private investigator. They had worked together on a missing person case involving a young Marine back in the day, and though their partnership had ended abruptly over a disagreement in tactics, Nathan trusted her instincts. Mostly. When Talia arrived the next morning, she didn't waste time with pleasantries. She handed him a manila folder with a printed email inside. It was an old message Amanda had sent to a government contractor 3 months before Jackson's death. The subject line simply read, Operation Sphinx Urgent. Nathan had never heard of it, and neither had Talia. But the recipient? He was someone who had since vanished, on paper at least. A logistics officer with no current address and a trail that went cold in 2021. Talia warned him that digging deeper might not just ruffle feathers, it could put lives at risk. Whatever this is, it's bigger than you or Amanda, she said, her voice low and firm. If Jackson was involved in something classified before his death, there are people out there who will do anything to keep it quiet. That's when Nathan asked the question that had been burning in the back of his mind. Do you think Amanda was part of it? Talia hesitated. If she was, she didn't act alone. And if she wasn't, then someone's using her as a pawn. The tension was unbearable now. Every door Nathan opened seemed to lead to another mystery. Every clue raised more questions than it answered. And then, just when things couldn't get more complicated, his home security system went offline. Not a glitch. A deliberate breach. When he checked the logs, the footage from the past 48 hours was gone, wiped clean. Whoever was watching him wasn't just close, they had already been inside his perimeter. That night, Nathan didn't sleep. He stayed up at the window, watching, waiting. And that's when he saw it, a slip of paper taped to his mailbox. 6 words, scrawled in thick black marker. You don't know the real Amanda. It was no longer just about a blocked ramp or a woman's careless decision. This was something else, something deep, hidden, and dangerous. And for the first time in a long time, Nathan realized he might be out of his depth. Not because he wasn't capable, but because the truth he was chasing might not be his to expose. And the worst part? Amanda may not be the villain of this story. She might be the bait. The following morning, while Nathan was still pacing the edges of his property like a soldier back on night patrol, trying to make sense of the warning left at his mailbox, the story took an even darker turn, one that pulled someone else into the storm he was only beginning to understand. His younger sister, Danielle, a local EMT and one of the few people Nathan had remained close to after returning from service, called him just after dawn with a tremble in her voice that sent his stomach dropping before she even spoke. She wasn't someone who rattled easily. But this time, her voice cracked. Nate, I found something weird on my windshield this morning. It's probably nothing, but I think you need to see it. When he arrived at her place, just 10 minutes away, a small house tucked near the edge of a wooded reserve, she handed him a folded piece of heavy paper. No envelope, no signature, just a simple, typed message in the center of the page. Stop asking questions about Amanda. Or, your family gets pulled in. The sentence was chilling in its plainness. No dramatic threats. No blood-red ink. But that was the point. It wasn't a scare tactic. It was a promise. Nathan's pulse thundered in his ears as he scanned the street outside Danielle's home. He knew what this was, classic psychological warfare. Someone had been watching him closely enough to know who he trusted, who he confided in. This wasn't just about hiding a military file or burying a shady operation. This was coordinated, sophisticated, personal. Danielle hadn't been involved in any of it. She worked trauma shifts, saved lives, stayed out of politics or conspiracy or anything remotely controversial. But now she had a target on her back simply because of her bloodline. And that meant Nathan had crossed a line he hadn't even seen. As he tried to calm her and promised he'd get her out of town if things escalated, he noticed something strange about the message she received. The font, Courier knew, was identical to the one on the note he had received the night before. The spacing, the formatting, everything matched, except for one small difference. Danielle's note had a faint watermark when held up to the light, barely visible. But once he caught it, it was unmistakable. A seal. A faded emblem of an eagle clutching arrows, the same design used by a now-defunct Department of Defense Intelligence task force Nathan had only heard whispers about back in his active years. It was called Falcon Unit 7, and it was believed to have been disbanded after a series of classified ops went sideways in 2017. But if someone was using their insignia, either the unit never really went away, or someone wanted Nathan to believe they were back. That revelation opened a door Nathan hadn't been prepared to walk through. If Falcon Unit 7 was somehow tied to Amanda's past, then Jackson Rourke wasn't just a soldier who died in a training accident. He may have been involved in operations so secretive, so heavily redacted, that even mentioning them could trigger surveillance flags. And suddenly, Amanda's skittish behavior, her moment of frozen shock when she saw Nathan, started to make a different kind of sense. She wasn't just avoiding him out of guilt or anger. She was protecting something or someone, possibly even trying to warn him off before it went too far. But that theory hit a wall later that afternoon when Talia returned with results from a background trace she'd run on Amanda's phone and financial records. One ping caught Nathan off guard. Amanda had been at a gas station near the local airport just 4 days before the parking lot confrontation. That wasn't strange in itself. Plenty of people drove through there, but surveillance footage, pulled through a favor Talia had with a retired TSA agent, showed Amanda handing an envelope to a man in a hooded sweatshirt, who then boarded a flight to Washington, D.C., under a fake name. That meeting wasn't random. It was a drop, which meant Amanda was either actively working with someone on the inside, or was being coerced into delivering sensitive material. But either way, she wasn't just a grieving widow. She was in this deep. Before they could dig deeper into who the man at the airport was, another twist dropped like a bombshell, this time from an unexpected source. A former Marine named Collins, who had served with Jackson years ago, messaged Nathan out of nowhere. Collins had seen a vague post Nathan made online asking for anyone who knew Jackson well during their deployment to reach out. His reply was brief but alarming. Jackson was looking into something before he died. Said he found something inside their own unit. Said he wasn't sure who to trust. I told him to be careful. He said Amanda knew more than she let on. Nathan's hands went cold. This wasn't just paranoia. This wasn't speculation or ghost stories. Jackson had confided in someone, just enough to show that he was aware of a threat from within. A betrayal. And Amanda's name was already part of the final conversation he'd had with someone he trusted. But then another curveball shattered the fragile timeline Nathan had started to piece together. Talia received a package delivered anonymously to her P.O. box, something she hadn't even told Nathan existed. Inside was a USB drive and a note. Be careful who you share this with. The footage is real. The date is a lie. When they loaded it, they saw what looked like helmet cam footage from a military op. The audio was scrambled, but the location matched the terrain Jackson's unit had operated in during their last deployment. And in one of the frames, nearly blurred by dust and movement, stood a man who looked exactly like Jackson, weeks after the military claimed he was dead. Nathan froze the frame. Enhanced it. There was no mistaking it. If the footage was real and all signs pointed to that, then Jackson Rourke didn't die when they said he did. Or, at the very least, he didn't die the way they claimed. And if Amanda had known that, or had been told to lie about it, the entire story they'd been given was a fabrication. Now the stakes were beyond personal. If Jackson had faked his death or been hidden away for reasons no one could explain, Amanda wasn't just caught in the middle. She might be the only person alive who knew where he really was. And with Nathan being watched, his family being threatened, and every clue leading deeper into a tangled web of lies, one terrifying question now loomed above it all. Was Amanda protecting Jackson from the world, or protecting the world from Jackson? Nathan never considered himself the kind of man who's scared easily. War teaches you to compartmentalize fear, to box it up, push it down, and keep moving forward, no matter how loud the alarms are going off in your head. But that night, as he sat alone in his dimly lit living room, clutching the frame-by-frame still of Jackson's blurry figure on the screen, something shifted inside him. It was subtle at first, like a draft sneaking in through a crack in the wall, but it grew louder the longer he stared. There was a truth buried in that footage, something raw and unfinished, something that wasn't just about corruption or conspiracy. It was about betrayal on a level that Nathan wasn't prepared to face. And as much as he tried to rationalize everything, the notes, the threats, the footage, he could feel the walls closing in. That gnawing voice in the back of his mind kept whispering the same thing over and over. You were never supposed to find this. The first real sign that things had gone too far came just after midnight. Nathan's phone vibrated with a text, unknown number, no name. You're not as quiet as you think. You've got 24 hours to walk away. Last warning. No context. No location. Just a clock ticking invisibly over his head. Nathan froze, heart pounding. He rushed to the window and scanned the street outside. His neighborhood in Charlotte was usually calm, especially at night. But this time, he noticed something odd. A dark SUV parked across the road that hadn't been there before. No lights on inside. Engine off. But someone was behind the wheel. Just sitting. Watching. That eerie stillness that doesn't belong in any normal situation. He waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The SUV never moved. No one got out. And when Nathan finally stepped onto the porch and started toward it, it pulled away, slowly, deliberately, without urgency. Like whoever was inside wanted him to see, wanted him to know they could get close whenever they wanted. The dread settled deep in his bones after that. Not because he was scared for himself, but because Danielle hadn't picked up any of his calls that evening. She was always quick to respond, especially since the warning. But now, 3 texts, 2 calls, and radio silence. No one at the EMT station had seen her since her morning shift ended. Nathan's mind spiraled. He tried her apartment. Lights off. No car in the lot. The neighbors hadn't seen her. Not even the old woman next door, who spent all day on her balcony feeding the squirrels. It was like Danielle had vanished into thin air. And the timing wasn't a coincidence. Not after the note. Not after the SUV. Someone had taken her, or forced her to run. And that's when Nathan realized this wasn't about Amanda anymore. This wasn't even about Jackson. This was about leverage. Someone out there was pulling strings, and they were tightening the noose around Nathan's life piece by piece. By morning, Nathan hadn't slept. He sat in the same spot all night, gun on the table, adrenaline churning through his system like battery acid. Talia showed up just before dawn, her face pale, eyes sunken with exhaustion. "I got into an old DHS server," she said, voice shaky. "I shouldn't have been able to. It was wide open, too wide. Almost like someone left the door open on purpose." She dropped a folder in front of him. Dozens of files, all redacted, but one photo stood out. A surveillance shot from 3 months ago. Amanda, standing outside a nondescript building in D.C., talking to a man whose face had been completely blurred out. But whoever compiled this didn't care about the faces. They'd labeled the file with one word: asset. Not wife. Not civilian. Asset. That single label redefined everything. If Amanda was working with federal intelligence, even as a pawn, then whatever she had been part of went so far above Nathan's pay grade it might as well be in orbit. And worse, it meant someone within the system didn't want the truth out, and they were willing to remove anyone who got close. People like Danielle. Nathan's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. Every new document raised more questions. Who was Amanda really? Had she known what Jackson was doing before he died? Was Jackson even dead at all, or had his disappearance been a cover orchestrated by the very agency Amanda was now tied to? The trail didn't just go cold, it went dark. And that darkness began to seep into Nathan's thoughts. He started questioning everything. Had he walked into a trap from the very beginning? Was Amanda blocking that ramp because she knew he'd confront her? Because she needed him to? The whole encounter had felt off from the start, her reaction too controlled, too calculated. What if it hadn't been coincidence at all, but a trigger? A test? A way to see how much he still remembered from his military days? Sleep-deprived and paranoid, Nathan began noticing patterns he hadn't caught before. The same car following him to the grocery store. A woman in a gray hoodie who always seemed to be sitting alone at the cafe near his gym. Cameras outside his house tilted ever so slightly from the angle he'd set them. His own home no longer felt like a safe haven, it felt like a stage. Like someone was watching his every move, recording every misstep, waiting to decide if he was still useful or expendable. And then came the package. Small. No return address. Left on the porch like it belonged there. Inside was a single item, Danielle's EMT badge. Burned around the edges. No blood. No note. Just the badge like a signature. A brutal message. Nathan collapsed into his chair, fists clenched, chest heaving. He knew what this meant. It wasn't confirmation she was gone, not yet, but it was a warning. They had her. And if he didn't stop, she'd be the next ghost in this twisted game of shadows. But something about the badge didn't sit right. A faint scratch across the back, barely noticeable unless you held it just right. It wasn't random. It was a symbol, crudely etched. 3 intersecting triangles, like a pyramid collapsed inward. Nathan recognized it from one of the classified symbols used in Falcon Unit 7's Black Ops. The mark of extraction protocol, which meant Danielle might not have been taken as punishment but as bait. And just like that, the puzzle shifted again and Nathan realized he was no longer a player on the board. He was the target. Nathan sat in his garage long after the sun had vanished behind the treeline, his laptop balanced on his knee, his eyes fixed on the frame-by-frame stills from the body cam footage he'd taken from the parking lot. The night had pressed its weight against the windows, and inside the room, the only sound was the mechanical buzz of the ceiling fan, spinning endlessly, unaware of the spiral Nathan's life had fallen into. His head throbbed from exhaustion, nerves frayed to their ends, but there was something about the footage he kept going back to. The way Amanda had turned back toward him after he called her out. The way her eyes flicked toward the corner of the building, just for a second, as if checking for someone or something. He hadn't noticed it before. Not when he was fueled by anger, by betrayal, by years of grief compressed into a single confrontation. But now, when he slowed the video to a crawl, he saw it. A reflection. Barely a blur. But it was unmistakably human. Someone had been there, watching, waiting. He isolated the frame and enhanced it the best he could with what little software he had, and when the blurry outline took form, his heart stopped. It wasn't Jackson. It wasn't anyone from the unit. It was Talia, standing just far enough away to be hidden, but close enough to observe everything. Nathan recoiled from the screen as if it had burned him. His mind raced, trying to fill in the blanks. Talia had been helping him from day one, digging into records, unlocking encrypted files, feeding him breadcrumbs. But what if she wasn't helping at all? What if she was leading, guiding him, not toward the truth, but toward a manufactured reality designed to make him act? What if every clue, every threat, even Danielle's disappearance, had been carefully placed to manipulate him? He didn't want to believe it. Talia had been the one person he thought he could trust. She'd been by his side since the funeral. She'd cried with him. She'd sworn they'd find out what really happened to Amanda. But now, he wasn't sure if she had ever been on his side at all. Before he could process the betrayal, his phone buzzed. Another text. This time, no threat. Just a location. Southbridge Storage. Unit 19C. Midnight. No name. No explanation. But he didn't hesitate. Whatever was waiting for him there, it was the next piece. And at this point, the only way forward was through the storm. The drive felt longer than it should have, his mind looping over every conversation he'd had with Talia. Every moment where she'd steered him one direction or another. There were so many things he'd ignored, brushed off. Her hesitation when he mentioned Amanda's past. The way she always had an answer, always had the next file ready before he even asked for it. Her insistence that he not go public. That he wait. That he trust her. The storage facility was deserted when he arrived, its flickering overhead lights casting long shadows across rows of identical metal doors. He parked near the entrance, heart pounding as he approached Unit 19C. The lock was already cut. Inside, dimly lit by a single hanging bulb, was a small desk, a filing cabinet, and a wall covered in photographs. Dozens of them. Amanda.
Danielle. Talia.
Nathan himself. Every moment documented, time-stamped, catalogued. Surveillance shots from months ago. Conversations recorded from bugs he never knew existed. In the center of the wall was a line connecting Talia to a government agency Nathan had only heard about in whispers, DICON, a covert branch of counterintelligence known for running unauthorized domestic operations under the guise of national security. Talia hadn't just known Amanda. She had recruited her. Then came the final blow, a video file left open on the laptop next to the wall. Nathan pressed play, hands trembling. The footage was raw, unedited. Amanda sitting across from Talia in a sterile room. If he ever finds out, Amanda said softly, he won't forgive me. He'll think I lied to him from the start. Talia replied, he doesn't need to know. Not until we're sure the operation's compromised. He's emotionally volatile. If he gets involved, we risk exposure. Amanda nodded. And Jackson, she asked. Talia looked her straight in the eyes. He's in protective custody. It's the only way we could keep him safe from the agency. He knows too much. Nathan's world tilted on its axis. Jackson wasn't dead. Amanda wasn't innocent. Talia wasn't his ally. Everything he'd been chasing had been a mirage, a carefully orchestrated narrative designed to provoke him, distract him, and manipulate him into chasing ghosts. They hadn't just used Amanda, they'd used him. All of it, the SUV blocking the ramp, the confrontation, the surveillance, was part of a larger play. He wasn't the hunter. He was the bait. And now, whoever was really behind it all knew exactly how far he was willing to go. But before he could react, the lights in the unit shut off. Complete darkness swallowed the room. And just as his vision adjusted, he heard a sound behind him. The door sliding shut. And the click of a lock engaging. Nathan's breath caught in his throat as the storage unit door slammed shut, sealing him inside with the weight of everything he had just uncovered. He stood frozen in the dark, his ears straining for movement, for a footstep, a whisper, anything to signal who else might be in there with him. But the silence was absolute, almost mocking. Then came the low, mechanical hum of the overhead light flickering back on, not through a switch he could control, but remotely, somewhere, someone else was watching. He turned back to the laptop, now displaying a new message in bold text across the screen. You have until dawn to decide. Walk away or reveal everything. If you choose wrong, she dies. Beneath the message was a live feed of Danielle, blindfolded and bound to a chair in what looked like an old industrial room, her mouth gagged but her body thrashing in panic. Nathan's knees buckled as he stumbled backward. This wasn't a scare tactic anymore. This was real. Danielle had been the last person he could trust, the only one who'd stuck by him since Amanda's death. And now she was being used as leverage, a pawn in a game he no longer understood. The rage that had once fueled him was now something else entirely, an unbearable pressure building behind his ribs, a quiet desperation that screamed louder than any war zone he'd ever faced. But as the feed looped in front of him, something in the background of the video caught his eye. A rusted license plate hanging on the wall, barely visible, but he recognized it. It belonged to an abandoned warehouse near the edge of town, a place he and Amanda had investigated months ago and dismissed as irrelevant. Clearly, they had missed something. But before he could make a move, his phone rang. No caller ID. When he answered, the voice on the other end was calm.
Too calm. You've seen the message. You know what's at stake.
You want the truth? Then you stay quiet. Shut down your recordings. Wipe your hard drives. Walk away. We'll let her go. No more threats. But if you breathe a word of what you found, she dies before sunrise. The line went dead. No room for negotiation. No hint of bluffing. Nathan stood in the silence that followed, the weight of the ultimatum crashing down around him. Everything he'd been chasing, the shadowy organization, Amanda's secret life, Jackson's fake death, was within reach. But to take it meant gambling with Danielle's life. And worse, he couldn't even be sure if saving her meant losing everyone else. For the first time, he didn't know what the right move was. There was no playbook, no fallback. Just consequences. He stumbled out of the storage unit and into the cold night, the air thick with the weight of the decision ahead. Every instinct screamed for action, for justice, for confrontation. But what if that instinct had been what they'd been counting on all along? What if every step, every clue, every ally had been another cog in the machine steering him toward this very crossroad? He didn't even know who they were anymore. Daikon? Some rogue element within it? Talia? Amanda herself? And with every revelation, the lines between enemy and friend blurred further. But he knew he had to confront Talia. There were too many unanswered questions, too many signs he had ignored in the name of trust. And if she was truly part of this, then maybe, just maybe, She held the key to saving Danielle. He found her just before midnight, parked in her usual spot behind the old train station where they used to meet when things got too dangerous to talk in public. She looked calm, collected, as if she knew he was coming. Nathan didn't waste time. He slammed the door shut behind him and stared her down with a fury he didn't bother to conceal. "You watched that day in the parking lot. I saw you. You were there before I even got out of my truck. You've been watching everything, haven't you?" Her expression didn't shift, but her eyes betrayed something, a flicker of regret, or maybe fear. "You weren't supposed to see that," she whispered. "Then explain it," Nathan growled. "Explain why you let me believe I was uncovering this on my own. Why you fed me lies wrapped in truth. And where the hell is Danielle?" Talia's jaw clenched, her calm unraveling. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she said finally. "We were trying to protect you. Amanda didn't want you involved. That's why she kept the operation secret, even after she found out about Jackson. But when she died, things changed. We had to keep you close to control the damage.
You were never supposed to know about Daikon.
Or what Amanda was really doing." Nathan took a step closer, his voice shaking with disbelief. "So you used me. You let me think I was going crazy. Let me chase shadows. And now Danielle is what? A casualty? Collateral damage?" Talia's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed hard. "Danielle was compromised. We don't know how or when, but someone used her to track your movements. She's the reason they stayed ahead of you. This whole operation, it's more tangled than you know. We're not the only ones pulling strings." Nathan reeled at the words. He couldn't believe it. Not Danielle. Not her. But Talia showed him the file, right there in the car. Surveillance logs, tapped calls, movements too precise to be coincidence. Someone had been feeding Danielle just enough information to earn his trust while steering him into danger, whether she knew it or not. And still, the feed from the warehouse played in his mind, her face twisted in fear, her hands tied. If she was part of it, she was paying for it now. And if she wasn't, then they were using an innocent woman to force him into silence. Nathan turned away from Talia, his mind spiraling. The truth had never been further from reach. Every answer only opened up another locked door. And with each passing minute, dawn grew closer, and the clock on Danielle's life ticked louder. Nathan's pulse roared in his ears as he barreled through the overgrown path leading to the old warehouse. What used to be just another forgotten structure on the edge of town was now a critical piece of a puzzle he could no longer ignore. Every broken window, every rusted panel felt like the skin of something monstrous hiding in plain sight. Inside that building was the truth, or at least the next layer of it, and possibly Danielle. But more than that, it was the place where everything began unraveling. He knew the feed had shown her inside. He had memorized the peeling paint, the cracked cement, even the broken fans spinning lazily in the corner. They weren't just keeping her there, they were making a statement. As he reached the steel door, he expected resistance, maybe even an ambush. But it creaked open with eerie ease, revealing a dim corridor lit by flickering industrial lights. Every step he took echoed like a countdown. He rounded a corner and came face to face with the one person he never thought he'd see again, Jackson. Standing tall, composed, almost smug in the same dark tactical gear he was supposedly buried in months ago. "You shouldn't be here, Nate," he said casually, as if they were bumping into each other at a grocery store, not at the epicenter of a multi-layered nightmare. Nathan froze. Every part of him wanted to rush forward, demand answers, throw punches, but it was the gleam in Jackson's eyes that held him in place. This wasn't the friend he once knew. This was someone else. Someone who had crossed a line so deeply that there was no coming back. "I watched you grieve," Nathan spat, barely able to contain the storm inside him. "I buried your body. I delivered your eulogy. You let me believe you were dead." Jackson tilted his head, a faint smirk twitching on his lips. "That's because, for your safety, I needed you to believe it. Amanda knew. Talia knew. We were trying to protect the operation. But then Amanda got too close to something she shouldn't have. And now here you are, doing the same thing." Nathan felt the words stab deeper than any bullet ever could. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a revelation that nearly everyone around him, Amanda, Talia, even Jackson, had been operating on a level he hadn't even known existed. And they had kept him in the dark, all under the pretense of protection. "You were my brother," Nathan said, his voice raw.
"And you used that. You used me."
Jackson stepped closer, his voice lower now. "I didn't want it to come to this. But you started asking questions. You started poking holes. And then Daikon realized they had a leak. Someone on the inside was feeding intel to the wrong side. That's when Danielle got involved. She was the leak, Nate. Whether she knew it or not, someone used her to compromise everything Amanda died for." Nathan wanted to believe it was a lie, a manipulation. But something in Jackson's tone, a grim honesty, reluctant finality, told him otherwise. Before he could respond, a door behind Jackson burst open, and Talia emerged, gun drawn, her face pale and twisted in panic. "Don't listen to him," she shouted. "He's not who you think he is. He never was." Jackson didn't fake his death. He was taken turned. They got to him. He's part of the inner circle now. Nathan's brain couldn't process fast enough. The two people he had trusted most were now facing off, guns pointed, stories clashing. And every second wasted could cost Danielle her life. He raised his hands between them. "Somebody tell me where she is. Right now." But neither moved. And then Talia dropped a bomb that shattered what little remained of Nathan's ability to distinguish truth from fiction. "Amanda isn't dead, Nathan," she said, her voice trembling. "She staged it. To protect you. And to bring down Daikon from the inside. Danielle found out and tried to reach you. That's why they took her." The air was ripped from Nathan's lungs. His heart thundered, as if it were trying to break through his chest. "No," he whispered. "That's not possible." Jackson's face hardened. "She's lying." Amanda's body was confirmed. "I was there. We buried her. She gave her life for this mission." But the way he said it lacked conviction now, as if even he wasn't sure anymore. And that was when the floor truly began to collapse beneath Nathan. This wasn't about just Amanda, or Danielle, or even Daikon. This was about something far bigger, far darker. A deep state operation using fake deaths, psychological warfare, and surveillance tech so advanced it blurred the line between truth and illusion. And now Nathan was in the middle of it all, not as a player, but as a target. Just then, a monitor flickered to life behind them, revealing a live broadcast of a government press room. The president's chief of staff was holding a briefing, speaking about a cyber breach threatening national security and referencing a former military operative turned rogue, with a blurred image that was unmistakably Nathan. They were framing him. They weren't just trying to silence him, they were trying to erase him. Publicly. Officially.
Permanently.
Talia's eyes widened. "It started. They're wiping you out, Nate. If you walk out that door, you'll be hunted. Every camera, every satellite, every badge will be pointed at you. But if you stay, we can end this. Together." Jackson shook his head slowly. "Or you can walk away and live. Forget the mission. Forget Amanda. Leave Danielle. Save yourself." Nathan's hands clenched at his sides, his thoughts racing. No more illusions. No more guesswork. This was the edge of the cliff. One move, one decision, and everything would either fall apart or finally come together. The walls of the abandoned warehouse trembled beneath the roar of incoming choppers, their blades slicing the night air like mechanical vultures circling overhead. The air smelled of concrete dust, gun oil, and betrayal. Nathan stood in the heart of the chaos, sweat running down his face, every muscle coiled, every breath shallow. In his left hand, he clutched the encrypted drive, just decrypted by Talia moments ago, which held the names, dates, and operational details of every covert action Daikon had executed over the past 10 years. Government black sites, assassination orders, false flags, fabricated deaths, including Amanda's. The final file on that drive was a redacted transcript revealing that Amanda had been ordered to go underground not to protect Nathan, but to monitor him. She had been part of the program to manipulate his every move, shaping his choices, feeding him misinformation. She never left him to protect him. She left because he was the experiment. Jackson's voice echoed through the intercom, his tone now devoid of warmth. Put the drive on the ground, Nathan. That information doesn't belong to you. It never did. You were never meant to see this part of the game. The sound of boots pounding against metal stairways reverberated in the background as agents closed in. But Nathan wasn't hearing them anymore. His eyes were locked on the terminal in front of him and the file he hadn't yet opened, labeled only Operation Lighthouse. Talia hovered near him, torn between fear and fury. You open that file, there's no turning back. We expose them all, but they'll paint us as terrorists. You know they control the media, the intelligence feeds, everything. They'll erase us. We'll be villains in every news headline by morning. Nathan didn't answer her. His mind was back in that alley weeks ago when a woman blocked a wheelchair ramp with her SUV and casually dismissed the Marine trying to pass. That small act of entitled arrogance was what had triggered this entire storm. Danielle had filmed the incident, posted it online, and unknowingly tagged a face that shouldn't have been recognized, a mid-level Daikon handler whose presence there wasn't just a coincidence. It was surveillance. That moment was the match that lit the inferno. Danielle had seen something she didn't understand, until now. She was the first civilian to accidentally stumble into the web. And it was why they had taken her. Suddenly, the warehouse lights shut off, plunging everything into darkness, except for a blue glow on the screen. The terminal clicked. A prompt appeared. Final confirmation required. Leak all files to global press outlets. Nathan's finger hovered above the enter key. And then Jackson's voice rang out from the catwalk above, no longer masked by electronics, but raw and full of venom. You were never supposed to be the hero, Nathan. You were supposed to be the fuse. Amanda's love, your grief, your awakening. We engineered every part of it. You think you're doing the right thing, but you're just finishing our test. You were always the final subject in Operation Lighthouse. It hit like a freight train. Every instinct, every decision he thought was his own had been nudged, shaped by algorithmic modeling, surveillance, and emotional manipulation. His parents' deaths. His military promotions, his friendship with Jackson, even Amanda. None of it had been random. And now, standing here, he had two options: walk away with the drive and live out the rest of his life in hiding, knowing the truth but keeping it buried, or leak everything and become public enemy number one, risking Danielle's life in the process. Because if he pushed that button, they would come for her next. She was still alive. Talia had confirmed it. But she was leverage, a hostage held not just to ensure his silence, but to test whether his morality was stronger than his love. I know what you're thinking, Talia whispered behind him. But sometimes justice isn't clean. It's messy, it's cruel, and it hurts the innocent. If you do this, you're not a hero anymore. You're the firestorm. Nathan closed his eyes for a breath, remembering Danielle's voice, her laugh, the stubborn tilt of her chin, the day she stood between a child in a wheelchair and a stranger's apathy. That spark, that defiance, that heart. She hadn't asked to be dragged into this, but she refused to look away when something was wrong. And neither could he. He pressed the key. Sirens exploded across the airwaves. Monitors flashed red. The data stormed the internet like a tidal wave. Journalists, rogue activists, even allies inside the system began receiving full dumps of the classified material. In the chaos, Jackson leapt from the catwalk, gun drawn, rage distorting his face. Shots rang out. Nathan dove for cover as Talia fired back, screaming something he couldn't hear over the alarms. And then, an explosion tore through the east wall, sending steel beams and glass flying. The roof began to collapse. In the debris, Nathan crawled toward Talia, who was motionless, blood seeping from her shoulder. She forced a burner phone into his hand and rasped, "You'll find her at the safe house in Elko. They'll come for her first. Go." And then her eyes fluttered shut. A shadow loomed behind him, Jackson. Limping, burned, bleeding, still alive. "It's not over," he growled. "You think you ended it? This is only phase 1. They'll rise again.
You'll see.
Nathan didn't reply. He swung a steel pipe and knocked him cold. As he staggered out of the warehouse, sirens fading behind him and smoke curling into the stars, the first live streams began rolling. The headline screamed, "Leaked documents reveal secret government surveillance program. Whistleblower exposes covert mind control operations. Is the government targeting its own veterans?" The world was watching now, and Nathan was no longer alone. But as he disappeared into the Nevada night, heart pounding and fate uncertain, his phone buzzed once with a single message from an unknown number. "She remembers you. She's waiting. But not everyone on your side is who they seem." The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The snow crunched under Nathan's boots as he stepped out of the worn-down pickup truck, the kind of no-name vehicle that wouldn't turn heads in a quiet town like Elko, Nevada. The early morning sun stretched across the horizon like a promise trying to warm a world that had gone cold. Everything in his body ached. Every scar, every memory, every sleepless night had finally led him here. After weeks on the run, after blowing the lid off one of the biggest covert operations ever hidden from the American public, after losing people he cared about and nearly losing himself in the process, he was standing outside a modest cabin tucked against a ridge, where he hoped to find the one person who might still make sense of the wreckage. He paused at the porch, unsure if the answers waiting inside would heal or haunt him.
But he knocked anyway.
The door opened slowly, cautiously, as if the past were peeking through before allowing the present to step in. And there she was, Danielle. Her face was thinner, her eyes wary, but her expression softened the second she saw him. No words were needed. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, holding on like she wasn't sure if he was real. Nathan let out a shaky breath, the kind that carries years of grief and weeks of adrenaline. They stood in silence, two souls who had been torn apart and pulled back together by forces they never asked to fight. Inside the cabin, over black coffee and shared silence, Danielle finally spoke. She hadn't known everything, but she had known enough to stay hidden, to survive. Talia's warning had reached her just in time. The safe house was more than a location. It was a final gift from someone who'd paid the ultimate price to buy them both a second chance. But even as they sat there, trying to reclaim a sliver of normalcy, the world outside was unraveling. News networks were still sorting through the data dump Nathan triggered. Some called him a hero. Others labeled him a traitor. Conspiracy theories flooded TikTok and YouTube shorts. Asterisk, mind control program exposed. Top secret black ops revealed. Whistleblower leaks shake White House. Asterisk, but the truth was murkier than headlines could capture. Politicians scrambled to contain the fallout, denouncing the existence of Operation Lighthouse even as internal documents proved otherwise. Some agencies went dark. Others were restructured. But the core of the machine, the surveillance, the manipulation, the illusion of control, it was still alive. Just deeper underground now. Smarter. Quieter. Nathan had exposed them, but exposure wasn't the same as destruction. And in a world where power operates in shadows, truth can be weaponized or buried, depending on who holds it. As days turned to weeks, Nathan and Danielle began to piece together their own lives, bit by bit. They didn't pretend things would ever be the same, but there was comfort in shared resilience. He found peace in small routines, fixing the porch steps, reading in silence, watching the stars without checking over his shoulder. Danielle started painting again, her strokes capturing emotions too deep for words. Sometimes they talked about Amanda, about Talia, about what it meant to choose truth over safety. Then, one evening, just as a thunderstorm rolled across the valley, Nathan received a package without a return address. Inside was a small black notebook. Handwritten notes.
Coordinates.
Names he hadn't seen in the original files. At the bottom of the final page was a symbol, the same one that had been branded on the Daikon server. The implication was clear. Operation Lighthouse was never meant to be stopped by one man. It was bigger, more layered, still active. And someone out there wanted him to finish what he started. He closed the book slowly, the storm crackling in the distance. Danielle looked at him, sensing the change in his posture. "What is it?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with worry. Nathan didn't answer right away. He stared at the horizon, at the lightning flashing like an omen across the plains, then finally turned back to her. "It's not over," he said softly. "But this time we're not playing by their rules." As the rain began to fall, they stood at the edge of the porch, not as victims, not as fugitives, but as survivors who had seen behind the curtain and lived to tell about it. The story had taken everything from them, but in the end, it had also given them something rare: clarity.
Not peace, not safety,
But purpose. And sometimes, in a world ruled by secrets, purpose is the only truth that matters. Now here's the question you've got to ask yourself. If it were you, would you have pressed that key? Or walked away? Because what you just watched wasn't fiction. It's a reflection of how easily the system can shape reality and how few people ever question it. And that's the part they never want you to see.